Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
It really is, as always, because Tony, as we have done seemingly like a dozen times already this month, it is a breaking news podcast, and it is about an Ohio State football player who has decided to put off the NFL for another year and come back for 2024. This is the only kind of show we do. I assume we're just going to have like 300 more of these, and then the season will start.
I'm getting tired of it. I wish these guys would just go pro. Enough of this stuff. I don't have time for this. Having to put stuff on hold, got to do this, got to record that. This guy's coming back, wants to play another year. It's getting very tiresome, but now we are here to talk about TreVeyon Henderson, Ohio State running back, deciding, like everybody else almost, to say, no, I'm going to put the NFL on hold. Is coming back for his senior season as a Buckeye. This is a first-team All-Big Ten running back this past season. Missed 3 games, just shy of 1,000 yards with 926 yards rushing. Finished, I think, second in the Big Ten in 92.6 yards rushing per game, second in the Big Ten at 5.94 yards per carry. I don't care who else Ohio State brought in from the transfer portal, and we'll talk about that. Getting TreVeyon Henderson back is huge because when he is healthy, he is one of the best running backs in the country.
I think you just had to look at the difference between what Ohio State's offense looked like when TreVeyon Henderson was not out there, and then what Ohio State's offense looked like when TreVeyon Henderson came back and was out there for most of the last part of the season. We're going to exclude the Cotton Bowl from this conversation for obvious reasons. But when he first came back and it was just back-to-back games where it was like 2 games in a row where he had 200 yards of total offense, just immediately changed what the ceiling for that team was. And coming back again next year, I mean, and again, we're going to talk about Quinshon, Judkins, and how all these different pieces fit together. But this is, I don't even know how to rank the importance of the returns at this point, because it feels like about 6 times this month we've said, boy, I think this is the biggest one so far. I don't know if it's the single biggest one so far, but it is a real big addition to this 2024 Ohio State team to have another running back of this caliber and, potentially be able to rotate guys and keep guys fresh, keep guys healthy, and potentially have to play 15 or 16 games to do it.
That's the key there when you have TreVeyon Henderson, who has had some injury issues the last 2 years. I don't know if it's too fair. The injuries in 2022 are much different than the 2023 in terms of the lingering aspect of it and just not being able to play through it. This was a 3-game stretch where probably maybe could have gone if needed at some point, but bounced back and was strong and good and healthy and explosive. And when he is out there, that ability at any point to go and get that home run, think about the Notre Dame game, it's just early in the season. He can go at any point, and not just carrying the ball, but as a receiver as well. Just a valuable offensive weapon. You're bringing in a new quarterback, Will Howard from Kansas State, who he's going to look around the room at Ohio State and be like, I've never had anything like this. And Deuce Vaughn was very good in 2022 for what he did at Kansas State, but he's never had anybody like TreVeyon Henderson to hand the ball off to throw the ball to bounce off of in terms of the read option game, that kind of focus. And you get him back, and he is accustomed to sharing, but also, if you need me to be the workhorse, I will do that. He had 28 carries against Penn State, 24 against Tulsa, 21 against Nebraska this year. Or I'm sorry, that was back in as a freshman. But is willing to be a workhorse. He had 24 at Wisconsin this year, and is the rare guy that was becoming more and more common. Actually, like, people understand, running backs understand, I don't need 30 carries. 30 carries is actually a bad thing over the course of too many games. You have times where TreVeyon Henderson throughout his career, even when he's playing, has 30 carries over the span of 2 games. And I think that's what they're looking for moving forward with him, Quinshon, Judkins, and we can talk about Dallin Hayden at some point as well. But the guy who has perfectly accepting of the sharing aspect. That's what he talked about when he signed with Ohio State, signed in the same class as Evan Pryor. I believe Pryor was first in terms of committing. Henderson followed him, and they talked about being a 1-2, and then you get TreVeyon Henderson here, and he's sharing with Mayan Williams as a 1-2, and has never been one of those guys that has ever complained, I need more carries. We've never seen him acting out on the sideline, never heard any rumblings of, if he doesn't get the ball this week, somebody's going to have hell to pay, and it's not a good scene. You've never heard any of that, and he's always been, whatever my role is, I'm happy to take it. And then when they go and get Quinshon Judkins, I think a lot of people assumed, that must mean TreVeyon Henderson is leaving, but you heard pretty quickly right away, it has no impact on TreVeyon Henderson. And this in fact is not seen as a negative. This addition is not seen as a negative at all by TreVeyon Henderson.
No, I think it's a positive for TreVeyon Henderson, and I think getting TreVeyon Henderson back is a positive for Quinshon Judkins, because Henderson has not been able to stay 100% healthy, I think, during any of his seasons. I think he's sort of been banged up over the course of pretty much every year he's been at Ohio State, especially the last two. And I think a lot of that's just a function of the battering you take as a running back. He's not a small back by any means. He's not you mentioned Evan Pryor earlier. I think Evan Pryor came to Ohio State at 180 pounds or something like that. TreVeyon Henderson has never been that, but he's also never been the 235-pound battering ram kind of back either. You've seen over the years with Henderson not being able to stay 100% healthy. I think you've seen with Judkins, especially last year, real heavy workload, sort of wore down. The numbers sort of tapered off towards the end of the year. You've seen that with Blake Corum at times at Michigan, when you're sort of relied on to be that 30-carry game kind of guy. That's great. You get a lot of carries, you get a lot of touches, you get a lot of yards, but it does wear you down over the course of the season. If you have two guys who can kind of be back one and also back one, I don't know if it's even 1 and 1A, it's kind of 1 and also 1. Boy, that takes a lot of the pressure off. It takes a lot of the strain off of you, and it probably positions you better for the NFL next year if you haven't just been pounded into that line so many times. How many times, we talk all the time about the tread on the back, on the tire for these backs, and you want to go to the NFL as soon as possible because a running back's career is so short because of the battering you take. If you can limit the number of, the term they use is exposures within the program, the number of times you're going to get hit, the number of times you're going to get pounded, the number of times you're going to have 3 guys landing on top of you, that is only going to help you stay fresh, probably put up better numbers this year on a yards per carry basis, and also have have more tread on the tires when you're heading to the NFL in a year.
Looking at the Ohio State running game this year and the Big Ten as a whole, I know the Big Ten defenses were all over the top of the stat board in terms of the best defenses in the nation. I think a lot of that was bad offense, and this is the first year since 2009 that not a single Big Ten team averaged 5 yards per carry, which is pretty crazy to me because you can go back and look over past years where Ohio State's averaging over 6 yards a carry. 2013, I think they're averaging, 6.8 yards per carry. And this year, not a single team over 5 yards per carry. And I would expect that to change next year for Ohio State and the focus on the running game as well. That's a great way to just ease in a quarterback, kind of like they did with Justin Fields in 2019. You focus on the run and the passing game grows. With this 1-1 punch, I guess we'll call it, of TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, 15 games, maybe 16. I guess 16 at least, right? As with the new playoffs. I mean, I mentioned a while back, a week or so ago, about 1,000 yards for each of them. I know 16 games is 62.5 yards per game rushing for 1,000 yards. So I think that might just be the target. And I don't think that is an outrageous goal for either guy. If I say 62.5 yards is a lot easier than a lot smaller number than 1,000. You know what I'm saying? Oh yeah, that seems manageable.
Yeah, I remember going through football cards back in the 80s, and the number of guys who was the 1,000-yard rushing club, and you're like,
yes,
Ruben Mays from the Saints? Who is that? And you flip it over and it's like 73 yards, 78 yards. It's like, that's not that good, but he just played all 16 games. With the length of the season now, 12 regular season games, plus a potential Big Ten championship game gets you to 13. And then if you're going to go to the national championship, that's at least 3 more. It could theoretically be 4 more if you lose your Big Ten championship game and then have to work your way through the first round and then the quarterfinals and then the semifinals and then the final. Boy, there is a lot more football coming your way. And you have the opportunity to, I think, I don't remember the last time Ohio State had 2,000-yard rushers in the same season. It's probably been a while. It feels like that's a possibility this year because Henderson only played 10 games and he had 926 yards. And you mentioned no team had averaged 5 yards a carry. Henderson averaged 5.9 yards a carry. Even last year, during what was something of a down year for him in 2022, he averaged 5.3 yards a carry. If he's got 150 carries, you got to figure he's getting close to 1,000. And if he's getting close, if he's got 150 carries, you got to figure Quinshon, Judkins, assuming they're both healthy, they're probably both at least in that 150-ish carry range. You might have 2,000-yard rushers in a season. I know Ohio State had a 2,000-yard rusher a couple of years ago with J.K. Dobbins back in 2019. But do you remember, Tony, did Dobbins and Weber ever hit 1,000 in the same year together? Or even going back to like a Braxton Miller offense, was there ever a Braxton Miller 1,000-yard rushing year where it was like him and Carlos Hyde? Do you remember?
Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde did it in 2013. I'm trying to rack my brain to see, have 2 running backs ever done it at Ohio State? And Pete Johnson never went over 1,000. And so I think that would be the only other really, like Pete Johnson and Archie Griffin. And he was a 989 yards and 75. This is assuming that also includes the bowl game. And I know sometimes they didn't count bowl game stats. But yeah, it doesn't happen all the time at Ohio State, clearly, and hardly ever happens. I don't think it is happening. We're both saying, I don't think so. And then somebody will say, Vince Workman and Carlos Snow. And it's like, what? Oh, but certainly not those two. The 1,000-yard club, Tom, just reminded me of the 88 tops cards because 87 was a strike year. So the 1,000-yard club that year, you only needed 750 yards because of like the 3 or 4 games that didn't get played because of the strike. So some really 752 yards in the 1,000-yard club. Congratulations, Reggie Langhorne, Webster Slaughter, whoever it might be.
Yeah, it was. We're talking a lot more about the 1980s NFL football cards than I was expecting to, but here we are. Is this with Emeka Egbuka back, with Carnell Tate, with all the wide receivers, all the wide receiver talent, with a running quarterback? Does this take? We've talked a bunch about Ohio State, and if Marvin Harrison and if Emeka Egbuka had stayed healthy, 2,000-yard receivers. Are they more likely to have 2,000-yard receivers this year or 2,000-yard rushers this year?
That's an interesting question because Will Howard is going to take some of those yards rushing, maybe 300 or 400. There are not a lot of wide receivers, so but really, which is a good thing in terms of trying to find 2,000-yard receivers. We know they've come close to 3,000-yard receivers back in 2021, 2022. Boy, that's a good question, Tom. I think they're going to have 2,000-yard rushers barring injury. And honestly, if we assume Emeka Egbuka is going to do it, don't you see Carnell Tate doing it as well?
Well, I think it is certainly well within the possibility of Carnell Tate doing it this year. And I think you're probably not going to have, but what's the constant problem for Ohio State wide receivers? Those darn tight ends vulturing all of those yards, those receiving yards. I don't think you're going to have quite the receiving total that Cade Stover's put up the last couple of years. So I think that'll help. I think you're going to run into a problem where they're going to do one or the other. I don't think, absolutely Carnell Tate could have 1,000 yards receiving this year. Absolutely, Quinshon Judkins could have 1,000 yards rushing this year. Absolutely, TreVeyon Henderson could have 1,000 yards rushing this year. Absolutely, Emeka Egbuka could have 1,000 yards receiving this year. I don't think you're going to get all four of those, because that would be four guys with 4,000 yards, and that doesn't include Will Howard, Will Howard rushes, all of the other guys you're throwing to. I mean, at some point, how many total yards are they going to put up as a team? I don't think you're going to have those four guys all hit, and I think it's going to be either 2,000-yard rushers or 2,000-yard receivers, probably, unless they play 16 games, in which case all of the old math goes out the window, which, the longer I talk, the more I'm like, well, if they do play 16 games, it would be almost impossible for them not to do it. So the over-unders this year may be a little harder to figure than normal.
Yeah, those are going to be some fun ones. Talking about Jeremiah Smith, over 1,000 yards or not. Well, we don't have to talk about it just yet. I am looking, like the 2019 offense, they rushed for 266 yards per game and threw for like 263. I don't think they need to throw for 263 next year, but that just seems like that almost seems like a low number for a Ryan Day offense until we saw what happened this year. I think I wouldn't be shocked if they're closer to 260 rushing this coming season, because they'll have that opportunity. And I can hear everybody saying, what about that offensive line? Yeah, the offensive line is going to be a part of that. It'll have to be a stiffer part of that. And then the 2 years with Justin Fields, 266 rushing per game, 256 in 2020. Like, they were able to do that. And then they still threw the ball pretty darn well also. But I'm not saying Will Howard is Justin Fields. I'm just saying when they did have a running attack, they still also threw the ball quite well. And so that'll be up to Will Howard as well. But TreVeyon Henderson, back for the Buckeyes, back for his senior season, back with an opportunity to rush for, 4,000 yards in his Ohio State career. He's about 1,270, 60 yards short. And that's not an outrageous number for him next year. That might be a target. When we talked to him as a true freshman, he talked about he had certain goals and targets that he had. I wonder if that number will come up at some point, the 4,000 yards, when we talk to him next. So that will do it for us. Please go ahead and we invite you to like this video. Go ahead and hit the bell to be notified when we're dropping more. I think this might be the last junior opting back into Ohio State, as far as I think we've done them all. I think they're all done now, and now we can move on and talk about everything else. But please also find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, where we're talking about this and many more things, talking about the transfer portal, of course, on the Huddle message board. Become a member and check us out there as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.